Hello everyone, I'm going back to old Top 5 channel. This is 5 troubling 9/11 conspiracy theories to lead you down a deep rabbit hole. Let's see how deep it goes.
On September 11th, 2001, the world changed forever. We all know what happened on that day. Nearly 3,000 people lost their lives in what is considered to be one of the largest terrorist attacks on innocent civilians since records began. The shocking scenes from that day in New York City still haunt us and are constantly replayed when discussing the events, the victims, and the conspiracy theories that followed. In this video, we'll be taking a look at 5 conspiracies that still rumble on all these years later. Was it a controlled explosion? Was there a secret agenda? Who knew about the attack? It's time to go back to September 2001, when life as we knew it would unfortunately take a dramatic and sinister turn. Now, we could talk about this stuff for hours, but we're going to keep this video relatively brief and just skim over 5 of the most common theories. If you'd like us to go more in depth on each of these theories, then perhaps we'll do an exclusive podcast episode on them. But let us know in the comments below. Let's begin. Was it a controlled demolition? Before we begin, we'd like to take a moment to remember those innocent souls who died on that day. From the victims who worked in the towers, to the terrified men, women and children on board the planes, and to the brave heroes of the emergency services who did everything they could to help. Their lives and sacrifices will never be forgotten. Our aim of this video is not to disrespect. We are simply presenting 5 conspiracies that have sparked debate since that day. We're not saying we believe or disbelieve any of these, just presenting you with the information so you can make up your own mind. The following claim is that the whole ordeal was somehow planned as a controlled demolition. The World Trade Center buildings were fully erected and operational back in 1973 and were the highlight of the New York City skyline for decades. One could not miss the enormous Twin Towers, as they were often a separate character in films, television shows, and promotional artwork for the city that never sleeps. However, on 9/11, the towers would fall, causing devastation, panic, and terror amongst the population of the city, as well as its iconic backdrop. The majority of people believe the events that unfolded were a result of the planes crashing into the towers, which had earlier been hijacked by Al-Qaeda terrorists. Yet many skeptics have opposed this narrative by pointing to the mysterious cloud puffs of smoke that appear to emerge from each of the floors of the towers as they collapse to the ground. Theorists believe this distinction is definitive proof that the towers were deliberately brought down by controlled explosive devices, which had previously been inserted into the columns of the buildings prior to the attacks. The specifics behind the theory suggest that a special type of pyrotechnic composition of metal powder and metal oxide known as thermite was involved. The chemical, when ignited by heat or chemical reaction, goes through an exothermic reduction oxidation reaction. This creates brief bursts of heat within small areas and can burn through metal. Many believe that thermite was secretly painted on the steel beams of the towers in order to destabilize and render them weak to collapsing. You've probably heard people say that jet fuel cannot melt steel beams, and this is where the thermite theory comes from. The theory has been rejected by many, who state that thermite itself would be unable to ignite or sustain a reaction under the weight and structural conditions of the towers. They support this hypothesis by claiming that the building's collapse appears on the face of it to look like a demolition job due to the middle sections being severely compromised. The east side of the towers fell in on themselves, followed by the west side, before the floors dramatically collapsed at speed to the ground below. While it may look like a series of small explosions, technicians claim that the air blended with multiple tons of pulverized concrete discharged outwards as each floor collapsed, therefore appearing like a controlled detonation. However, thousands of structural engineers have signed a petition to state that never in history has a building fell down due to fire, and that it is structurally impossible for the towers to have been brought down by planes alone. A video, which is often hidden or hard to find on media platforms, shows two firefighters discussing the aftermath of the devastation. They are covered in blood, dust, and appear genuine in their response to questions by the interviewer, who asks them what they witnessed as first responders. The men claim that they heard explosions before the towers collapsed, and believe that they were choreographed detonations. Though the video has given strong credence to the argument, it is yet to be verified and confirmed. Then there is Building 7, which we'll talk about in a separate video, and the story of demolition expert Danny Jowenko, who stated that World Trade Center 7 was brought down by controlled demolition. He happened to die under mysterious circumstances years later.
I have heard the 7th was taken down, controlled demolition, because it had sustained damage. And they did it in a way that was pretty much like that, where they did the beams and then they took it down. I've heard some people say it would have taken weeks to go through all the levels of World Trade Center. And number 7 was not nearly as tall, but they were able to do that in hours. So it is a bit of a, but I don't buy it. I don't buy it. Sometimes people want a conspiracy when, well, some people will find a conspiracy in anything, and I don't believe it.
But again, we'll save that for another video. Insider traders knew. Another widespread theory within the conspiracy community is that Wall Street stock traders were aware of the pending events before they occurred, thus allowing them to invest and manipulate the stock market to their advantage. This theory is quite easy to believe due to the preconceived stereotypes and culture of greed that is normally despised and associated with the finance capital of the United States of America.
I don't think that they're going to be excited to profit in the face of thousands of innocent people dying. I gotta say that I don't see that happening. Some, sure, especially if it's in, their own pockets, but I don't think any good person would feel happy about profiting like that on the death of other people. Now I say that, and you can say, well, Kris, what about Halliburton, and what about Lockheed Martin, and what, companies that make weapons for war? A little different. Stock market, these are Wall Street guys. I don't see that so much.
Theorists continue to state that just before the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center, an extraordinary amount of put options were placed on United Airlines and American Airlines stock. Investors tend to buy put options when they are concerned that the stock market will fall. A put gives them the right to sell an underlying asset at a fixed price through a predetermined time frame, something that will most likely increase in value when the price of its underlying asset goes down. It's believed that a handful of people on Wall Street knew of the plans to attack the towers, or of the aforementioned demolition story, and so placed their money on the aptly named Fear Index. Such claims have led to a deep investigation and analysis on the possibility that rich investors and the so-called fat cats of America's finance sector controlled the economy in the build-up to and wake of 9/11. In finance, a put-to-call ratio is a technical indicator demonstrating investor sentiment. The ratio represents a proportion between all of the put options and all the call options purchased on any given day. This indicator was applied to United Airlines and American Airlines, both of which had planes that were hijacked by terrorists. It is recorded that 4,744 put option contracts were placed on United Airlines, along with 396 call options by the Chicago Board Options Exchange. It's reported that the investment banking company Citigroup Inc. had approximately 45 times the normal volume 3 days before the attack. Its share fell $1.25 to $38.09. Morgan Stanley, which occupied 22 floors at the World Trade Center, had larger trading of options before the events, and profited when stock prices fell. Due to this suspicious activity amongst the financial giants of America, the Securities and Exchange Commission launched an inside trading investigation where they looked into Al-Qaeda's ringleader Osama bin Laden. It was suspected that the mastermind of the terrorist attacks had been receiving information and advice from one, possibly more Wall Street companies in the lead-up to the events. In the end, the 9/11 Commission concluded that any unusual activities and/or economic patterns were entirely coincidental. The Commission stated in their report that exhaustive investigations by the Securities and Exchange Commission, FBI, and other agencies have uncovered no evidence that anyone with advanced knowledge of the attacks profited through securities transactions. The unfortunate and terrifying possibility of insider traders colluding with terrorist organizations or profiting from their atrocities is an unforgivable concept, yet it's easy to believe in today's world. What do you think? Coincidence or truth? The Pentagon theories. Perhaps the lesser discussed event that took place on 9/11 was the attack on the headquarters of the United States Department of Defense, also known as the Pentagon. Based in the capital, Washington, D.C., there have been many theories and discussions surrounding how and why the building was attacked. One of the claims states that it was not struck by American Airlines Flight 77, but by a missile fired by the US government itself. Skeptics argue that much like the attacks in New York City on the same day, that the government was behind the occurrence, staging the events and using fake witnesses and actors, CGI graphics, and carefully choreographed explosives to give the impression that the government building was attacked. Though many say this theory is disproved by the plane's flight data recorder and radar footage, not to mention the families of the victims who perished on that day. There are many people who believe that there was something else going on entirely. In terms of the numbers and mathematics relating to the attack, a Boeing 757 commercial airliner measures 125 feet wide and 155 feet long. Yet the initial report stated that after the plane hit the building, an entry hole of 16 foot across and an exit hole of 12 foot wide was recorded. If this was the case, then the official version of events can be called into question. However, it was later declared that this was a misreporting error, with the official ASCE Pentagon Building Performance Report estimating the hole at the outer E-ring of the Pentagon's reinforced concrete walls was approximately, and more realistically, 75 foot across. The response continues that the reason Flight 77's dimensions were not fully calculated was due to the fact that one of the plane's wings fragmented upon impact on the ground, whilst the other wing detached completely from the Boeing 757 itself. This counterclaim is understandable, as the wings themselves would be too lightweight to crash and pass through the reinforced concrete of the Pentagon's structure, thus resulting in a smaller destructive hole. However, another suspicious claim was made by those who question the events of September 11th. It points to the sheer lack of aircraft debris described and illustrated in the official photographs and documentation, which were taken after the plane had struck. A plane the size of a Boeing 757 would surely have left a massive area of debris, especially as it struck a highly protective surface wall of a government building. This detail has led many to label the evidence as bogus. Alan E. Kilsheimer, CEO of Key CE Structural Engineers PC in Washington, begs to differ on this, as he was the person who found the black box recorder of Flight 77. Though it's not clear when Alan arrived at the site of the Pentagon on September 11th, he claims that he was attending a meeting earlier that day on K Street, a metonym for Washington's lobbying industry, when he got a call from his office about the attacks. According to the forensic engineer, he arrived at 5 p.m. and stated, "I picked up parts of the plane with the airliner markings on them. I held in my hands the tail section of the plane." He went on to claim that he also found body parts and crew uniforms and passenger clothing at the scene, something else which has confused many, leading to criticism and disbelief of his story. It may be the lesser discussed event that took...
Yeah, I would think that would have vaporized them. I've seen this video, and I'm sorry I can't move my screen, but it's real fast. You don't see anything.
But it's certainly one of the most bizarre and disputed. We'd love to know your thoughts and theory on this one, and whether or not you'd like us to discuss more in depth the Pentagon attack.
I find it difficult that a Boeing would have been able to do that. I don't think it was a missile. I think if anything it would have been a smaller plane. But in the end, I don't know.
News reports. Another theory from the conspiracy claimants occurred during the attacks on the Twin Towers, and is related to the controlled demolition scenario. Whilst the towers were ablaze, the BBC reported that Building 7 collapsed a full 26 minutes before the tower itself fell, leading to the suggestion that it was pre-arranged and that news outlets were in on the plot, or at least some of them. In recent years, video links to the live BBC report went viral and led to all sorts of memes, questions and theories. The video clip shows a BBC News anchor by the name of Jane Standley discussing the events in New York as the events unfold. Whilst on air, Standley states that Building 7 had collapsed, even though the building itself is behind her and still visibly standing. A short time later, however, when the report was finished screening, the tower fell, under what many claim mysterious circumstances. Could this have been a simple miscommunication or something more sinister? Richard Porter of BBC World News eventually responded to the rumours and to address the conspiracy directly on the editor's report from Tuesday the 27th of February 2007. He said, "We are not part of a conspiracy. Nobody told us what to say or do on September 11th. We didn't get told in advance that buildings were going to fall down. We didn't receive press releases or scripts in advance of events happening." When discussing the reports and on-air admission from Standley, he stated, "I've spoken to her today, and unsurprisingly she doesn't remember minute by minute what she said or did. Like everybody else that day, she was trying to make sense of what she was seeing, what she was being told, and what was being told to her by her colleagues in London, who were monitoring feeds and wires services." He goes on to confirm that conveniently, the BBC does not have the original tape recordings from September 11th, or the coverage from their live reports, admitting that it was merely due to a cock-up and not part of a wider conspiracy. 20 years after the tragic events in New York, BBC News released a report in September 2021 to confirm their sources of information during the unfolding of the terrorist attacks. The media giant relied on information from Reuters, another UK-based news agency. On the day of the attack, and while Standley was live on air, they had circulated the news report that Building 7 had collapsed before it physically came down. The Reuters news agency had mistakenly reported the collapse of the building, which was also picked up by CNN just before the live report BBC wrote.
Maybe the word had gotten to them that Tower 7 will be taken down. And so this person, it's like telephone, one person says something to someone else, to someone else, to someone else, and the message will slightly change. And so it just, or maybe they just messed up and they said, instead of saying Tower 7's damage, it will come down, they just said Tower 7 came down from damages. Well, it could have just been a simple slip.
As time has gone by, and with the rise of the internet, social media, and 24-hour news cycles, it is safe to say that fake news is very real and a terrifying concept. The possibility that the supposed misreporting on 9/11 was merely human error is something that is justifiably questionable. Do you not agree? United 93. United Airlines Flight 93, as we know, was also tragically part of the 9/11 story, but has also sparked rumours, debates and conspiracies in the aftermath of that tragic day. The flight itself was originally scheduled to depart Newark, New Jersey, and was destined for San Francisco in California. However, a group of 4 Al-Qaeda hijackers took control of the plane, intent on another terrorist attack. The recordings, investigative documentaries and live reports state that the passengers fought back against the hijackers, resulting in the plane crash landing in a large field located in Pennsylvania, named Stony Creek Township. Subsequent reports claim that all 40 passengers on the aircraft died in the crash, as well as the pilots, crew and hijackers. Yet there have been numerous theories surrounding United 93, which continue to this very day. One of the most prominent theories, as with all the attacks that occurred on 9/11, was that it was authorized and overseen by the United States government as a false flag operation. The reason for such an atrocity was to assign blame to Afghanistan and Iraq, thus providing them with justification to invade the regions and assume control of their natural resources, whilst boosting funds for the US military. One of the theories goes that the passengers on board United 93 had seemingly been informed that their own government knew of or were behind the attacks, and so the plane was destroyed by a military aircraft in order to permanently silence them and to conceal the truth. Apparently, there are numerous witnesses who claim to have heard a large explosion after catching a glimpse of a white-coloured aircraft, which was flying alongside the United Airlines commercial liner, the smaller jet disappearing after the airliner crashed in Stony Creek. Another claim is that the passengers were secretly removed from the plane and a replacement airliner was sent to take its place, again to keep those passengers quiet. Theorists believe that they were either murdered or sent to undisclosed locations by the US government. Interestingly, it has since been revealed that passengers aboard United 93 had certain jobs and careers that included an account manager for the Oracle Corporation, regional director for the Census Bureau of the United States, a vice president of a medical device company, and computer program designers and engineers. Despite the harrowing telephone calls from victims and an official recording from United 93 being released, where one can hear the pilot stating to the passengers, "Ladies and gentlemen, here is the captain. Please sit down, keep remaining seated. We have a bomb on board." The conspiracy theories continue to rage on. So that's it for this video. That was...
I don't believe that the plane was taken down to start the war with Iraq and Afghanistan. I think that some people are just kind of grasping at straws. You know, they want the conspiracy to be true because it makes things more interesting. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure throughout history there have been conspiracy theories that were real, but just because there's one that happened, let's say throughout history there's been 100 of them that have been legit. That doesn't mean that every single incident could be linked to a conspiracy theory. Look at all the people that would have been involved. Wall Street, to the government, to airlines, and they all have to be quiet about this. In the world we live in, somebody would have spoke by now, and you can't just go around and start killing people. Like, I just don't buy that. Although they are very intriguing, I will say. I could go down this rabbit hole, and they sound so good. They do lure me in. Don't get me wrong, they lure me in. And there's a part of me that loves the idea, but then I get done watching it, and then I snap out of it, and I'm like, oh yeah, that was entertaining, but no. What do you think? Are you the same? Do you fall for them? Do you like conspiracies? Do you not? Anyways, my dogs need to be eat, as I was going to say, need to be fed, because they're looking at me. So I'm going to end this here. There's a thanks button. You can donate to the channel. You don't have to. Subscribe if you don't want to do that. Hit that bell if you do subscribe, and give a thumbs up if you don't want to do either of the other two, because that helps me. So until next time, have a good day, have a good night.